Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Northwest Energy Coalition's Energy Efficiency Day webinar. We'll be recording this webinar and we'll post it on our website. My name is Kat Plimpton. I'm the Outreach Manager with the Coalition. The Northwest Energy Coalition is an alliance of over 100 environmental, civic, and human service organizations, progressive utilities, and clean energy and energy efficiency businesses in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and British Columbia. The coalition leads the Northwest's broadest alliance of energy interests in designing, promoting, and implementing clean, affordable, and equitable energy policy grounded in analytical expertise. For today's webinar, our panelists will give their presentations, and then we'll have questions from the moderator, and we'll also take questions from the audience. When we get to the Q&A portion, you can put your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll have you unmute to ask your question. Otherwise, please stay on mute. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Shani Taha, who will introduce the panelists and guide us through the Q&A section later in the webinar. Shani Taha is the Executive Vice President of UConns, an energy services company that focuses on delivering the benefits of energy efficiency improvements to underserved communities by targeting manufactured housing. Her long career in clean energy includes almost a decade at Seattle City Light. Shani, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, I'm not the new kid on the block, but I'm also not a techie. I'm a people person. So, but we've got two very strong and credentialed techies and energy folks to talk to us today about a topic that is on everybody's agenda. Even the Power Council is asking our stakeholders to address diversity, equity, and integration, helping all of our industry to figure out how they should examine both their thinking and their practices in terms of the impact on low-income and vulnerable communities. So that's a real heads up in the right direction. COVID and the wildfires in the Northwest have turned our business and operating environments upside down. And unfortunately, they're going to be around for a while. They're not going to be going away in the near future. Now, we're not medical professionals, but we do have skills here and we've got tools that can help moderate, mitigate, alleviate some of the challenges and the barriers in serving those communities. And these communities are the most vulnerable in terms of COVID and the wildfires. The highest number of percentages in hospitals are minorities, and the highest percentage of deaths are minorities. So we've got a lot to be concerned about and to address as we are looking to the future and looking to tomorrow. I'm going to have the speakers speak individually, and I'm going to introduce them as before they make their presentations, and then we'll get into the questions. And our first speaker is Peter Kiernan. He's the program director for Community Energy Project, a unique company which empowers people to maintain healthy and more livable homes, controlling utility costs, and managing natural resources. He's got a BA in Integrated Environmental Science from Colorado College, and he helps implement and oversee energy efficiency and repair programs for low-income households, and knows that from the communities, our frontline communities are a necessary part of the energy that we are all trying to manage today. Peter, you're on, okay? Look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm joining you here from Community Energy Project's office. Excuse our poorly insulated brick wall behind me, but yeah, I'm hoping to talk today. The question that we were posed is how we've thought about delivering energy efficiency services during a pandemic and why it's important to focus on these. So I want to start by, if we can go to the next slide here, and one more even, with building the vision for our energy future. So this winter, before everything shut down, CEP held a focus group with Black homeowners in Northeast Portland. And it was co-led with a media group called Flossin Media, who our goal was really to expose these homeowners to their opportunities and challenges around energy efficiency at their homes. And we had prepared a home energy score for each of them before starting the event. And to give a little context for where they're coming from, when my wife graduated from the local high school there in 2008, 21.4% of the student body were Black or African American. And by 2019, that number was down to 6.3%. So this is a neighborhood that's gone through a lot of changes. And Flossin Media, that Black-led media group, had a clear message, which was, you homeowners and this community need to be part of the energy transition, the ones that you've seen happen to your neighborhood with solar panels going on roofs and retrofits happening. And so, acknowledging my own position as a white male in the energy industry, I really hope that our goal can be to grow this movement and serve more communities. So we can go to the next slide here. Hopefully everyone at some point gets to hear a talk from Sherry Vilmark, another program director at CEP, but she's got a great metaphor that we're essentially all on a ship, and that ship is headed for runaway climate change, let's say. And the current rudder that we're employing to steer the ship is this small group of privileged people who, are being asked to do more and more. So buy an electric car, put solar on your roof, retrofit your home, eat vegan, the list goes on. And really, we're just ignoring this whole other part of our community and civilization. And we need it to be much broader, much more inclusive, and we need to make sure that the benefits are also flowing to that community. A false narrative that often gets portrayed, and you can go to the next slide. Yeah, here we are, good. Is that, low-income households don't necessarily care about climate change, but our own research and others as well show that these communities do really care. This group of clients said that slowing climate change was the most important measure when they were asked about a bunch of different issues facing society today. So next slide. To me, this means we need to rethink who we really think of as the environmentalist. Is it the person living in a 500 square foot apartment, taking public transport and wearing clothes from Goodwill, or is it the person that can afford the solar panels and buy from Patagonia and all those other things? Our position at CEP is that, we really want to grow this movement and make sure that the benefits are flowing to this other, low income group as well, and that they're part of the movement. So next slide. So that begs the question, who exactly are we? We are a nonprofit organization based in Portland, Oregon, and we really view ourselves at the intersection of climate justice. We do a lot of social service style work, and then we are also heavily involved in energy and energy efficiency. On one side of our programming, we have a lot of community education and engagement. So these are workshops to help homeowners, whether they rent or own or live in multifamily or single family, really learn how to use less energy in their home. And this team is also helping, Oregon has a requirement that 10% of the community solar program across the state is participated in by low-income households. So that team is also in charge of enrolling clients there and developing that. And then on the other side, there's the direct home services. These are the repairs, the weatherization, energy upgrades happening in the homes. We want to actually do the work that we believe in. Next slide. And part of doing the work that we believe in is also measuring that we're reaching the audiences that need it most. So 64% of households were below 50% median family income in last year's programs, and 59% identified as someone of color. And this is shown year after year in our equity report that we have really strong engagement across communities. And it's really the result of CEP being in many communities around Portland for 40 years. Next slide. And in addition to measuring who we serve, we also have this energy bent. And we've benefited from the fact that the city of Portland adopted a home energy score audit home energy score ordinance several years ago, and there have been 20,000 scores done across the city today. One is the least efficient home that could be scored on the rating, and a 10 is the most efficient. So it's supposed to be, a simple, easy to communicate metric. The graph on the left is the scores as they are today. The majority of scores are a 1. It's the most common score measured in the city. Yet on the other side of this, the DOE on the back end has a calculation to say, hey, if we did all the cost-effective things, where would these homes be? And so you can see that all of a sudden, those 1s are pushed to 6, 7, 8, and that's where the median stands if we were to make not even the technically possible upgrades, but the cost-effective ones. So that's really important as well. Next slide. So in thinking about how programs can adapt, I think we need to think of total impact. If we were to do all that work, that would save ratepayers across the city $50 million a year. So it's really about where money is flowing. It would also eliminate 200,000 tons of carbon annually, and it could be enough energy to power 50,000 homes. Next slide. And CEP has implemented one particular program in recent years, which is to replace old aging water heaters with high efficiency heat pump water heaters for low income clients. And so we, took the successes of that program and said, hey, what if we ran it across all 160,000 homes in Portland? And, just in energy carbon savings today, with the grid mix, that would be a 30% reduction. If we look out to 2030, where we know the grid is already going in Oregon, it's about a 90% reduction by making those shifts. And actually the energy savings from converting electric to heat pump water heater would be enough to incorporate all the new load from gas to heat pump water heater. So that's a big thing too. And just to make sure that things are flowing to the low-income communities, we've observed in our clients' homes that they're still 3 times as likely as a home across Portland to heat with oil, indication that they've been left out of other energy transitions. And per square foot, they are using considerably more energy because across homes, they have about 330 fewer square feet. So definitely a different burden that we know about, and DOE has published on this and a number of other organizations. Next slide. But, like presented before, that means that the impact opportunity is greater. And one of my key messages that I want to convey is that, we need to think about the other benefits that are being involved here. So, for example, some of our funding is specifically for repairs and around helping homeowners age in place. A lot of elderly clients come through our programs, and help them be more resilient to changes in their home, to build wealth and reduce unexpected expenses. So how can we really marry those ideas with that of energy efficiency? And I think they go hand in hand. And you can go to the next slide. So I know I'm running out of time here, and I want to be sensitive to that, but a couple key things that we think about on a high level for our programs, and what we've seen to build really strong ones over the years, are to really build trust in the community. As I mentioned, CEP is one of many, but community-based organizations have proven to their community that they believe them, they trust them, and that they'll do the right thing. And so from a policy or higher level perspective, to really look for those relationships where you can think of, like, who are the implementers on the ground who have the trust in communities? How can we pay them for that service that they're providing, that expertise in community, so that we can make sure that energy benefits flow there too. Next slide. I'll also suggest that we really need to think about cost effectiveness and eliminate it for low income households. Too many homes are told that no, you cannot get insulation in your attic because they have a leaky roof. And I would say that should put that household at the very top of the list of homes that need help, not kick them out of program participation. You know, we need to look beyond saving to investment return, and part of that will be valuing other benefits, and part of it will be just prioritizing low-income communities. Next slide. And with that, we need to make sure that the programs we do deliver offer value, and they are really benefiting the households holistically. So, you know, replacing a water heater, the average age of the water heater we've replaced is 18 years old, and we've found some that are over 40 years old. So, you know, these are big deferred maintenance items that people need to address, and you can help serve multiple outcomes by doing that. And then last slide, you know, programs need to be really easy and worthwhile for people to participate in. You know, we can't get bogged down in a lot of requirements of who can participate and who can't. Streamlining enrollment and intake and those sorts of things, and depending on organizations that have trust in the community, are all important levers that we can pull. Making sure that these energy efficiency upgrades get out into the market and are benefiting low income and frontline communities is really the challenge and the goal ahead of us. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very, very much. I'm not going to take questions. You can hold your questions till after Mohit speaks, and we can take some questions from you participants. But our next speaker is Mohit Jain, who is on the crack with me, which I just enjoy very much. And he's a senior scientist with the NRDC, focusing on affecting policies to accelerate the transition to a sustainable and clean energy. Mohit has had extensive background in energy conservation analysis. He's a voting member of the Regional Technical Forum and part of the Conservation Resource Advisory Committee. He holds a master's in civil environment and in architectural engineering from the University of Colorado, and a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from the University of Pune, correct? I think that's correct, in India. He's now based in Portland, and we're looking forward to his presentation as well. Mohit, you're on.
Hello. Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. Given that I live in Portland, but most of my work's in California, it's good to speak with all of you for a change. So starting a little bit with our current situation, you know, we've heard this phrase, and some of us know what it means about how COVID exacerbates existing inequities. And I would like to start with the example of how energy is one of those inequities. So next slide, please. Because of the recession, that's meant decreased income for a lot of people, but COVID also requires us to stay at home more and longer. So your energy needs have increased, but your ability to pay for them have decreased. So you need to be in a comfortable home to use energy equipment more, you know, and those two things are pretty misaligned, and they put people in a difficult position, thereby exacerbating inequity to energy access. Talking about energy efficiency, and energy efficiency has always needed to be cost effective, and it wasn't much of an issue until recently. And there are many reasons for it. And to figure out improvements, I do think it's important to understand those reasons. Over time, we've done a lot in energy efficiency. Codes and standards have improved and such. So many of the obvious places to get cost-effective savings have decreased. And then also, over time, we've asked energy efficiency to do many things. We've asked it to act as an energy resource. We've asked it to serve equity needs in the form of low-income programs. We've asked it to do market transformation, but really only judged it as an energy resource. And while all those other sort of easier cost-effective measures were flying off the shelves, that wasn't much of a problem. But as the policy and the world of codes and standards evolve, that's starting to become a problem. And these constraints have sometimes led to decreasing funding for equity programs. And even worse, my personal anecdotal experience has told me that a lot of program administrators are forced to make these hard choices of offering equity programs and resource programs, balancing across all these multiple objectives. And they can start to view programs that earned resource programs as dead weight, and that's not good for anybody. So one solution to that is to really separate out the energy efficiency portfolio into its three fundamental components: a resource, what you use to get cheap energy; market transformation, these are your longer term goals; and your equity sub-portfolio, so ensure that the benefits of energy efficiency are shared for all. And for each one of these sub-portfolios, you'd want policy aligned metrics for success, like cost effectiveness, budget, and so on. So focusing on the equity portion of it, I think we've all known this, but the traditional energy cost effectiveness metrics, they're misaligned with equity program objectives, because they really test for, is this energy efficiency measure the cheapest way to provide energy compared to firing up a gas power plant or something else, or hydro. But when you talk through equity program objectives, we really want to do many more things other than just provide energy as a resource. So we need to be honest, and the first step is to recognize that. So that brings me to my second point, is that equity portfolio needs its own objectives, metrics, and budget. So you really need a process to figure out what are the different suite of equity-focused things that are happening in the utility world, and how can you package them, make them easy to roll out, and how can you come up with robust equity objectives. So that's going to lead to my first recommendation going on, is that, next slide please, is that when you do this, you start focusing on how you can do the best possible job with your limited equity budget, and hopefully it's not too much of a limit, not on simply creating a cost-effective resource. And those are two separate things, you know. Next slide, please. So I'd advise most people in this space to develop a long-term equity and energy efficiency goal. And here's an example that I came up for California programs. In 15 to 20 years, homes occupied by lower income residents should be as or more efficient than homes occupied by others. So that really grounds you on what your long-term vision is, where you need to go. And then once you've established that, you can then work backwards to figure out stuff like budgets. So next slide, please. So ideally, your budget should be aligned with this objective. So if I want to treat these many homes, if I want to bring them to this state of having equitable housing, how much money do I need a year? And then you need to start asking some hard questions. How much can and should a utility fund? And this is important because you know, we all fund utilities, and it's important to keep electricity affordable, because one of the most inequitable outcomes is unaffordable electricity. You know, we want to encourage people to use electricity to charge their cars, to heat their water, as opposed to other sources. So we need to balance those two things. So a couple of things you can do to overcome that barrier. One is to combine many sources of funding. So we need funding from sources outside the utility sector as well. If we really are trying to do a societal good and going beyond saving energy, health, comfort, safety, and such, we need to figure out ways of co-funding this effort. Secondly, we need to make program delivery more efficient. Could you go back, please? Thank you. We need to make program delivery more efficient. In my experience in California mostly has shown that there are so many programs that target the same homeowners and essentially are trying to give them lower cost energy and better appliances, but there's just a lot of fragmentation. And per Peter's slide, we need to make it easy for folks to participate in these programs. We need like a one-stop shop for folks to be able to access all the options available to them. You know, fragmentation not only wastes money and utility money, but it also makes it harder for people to participate. So those two things should be taken into account. And then next slide, please. Finally, when you do this and you come up with objectives for equity programs and what is it that you're trying to do, it's important to be inclusive and solicit feedback from communities. You know, if we are trying to serve them, we need to understand what's most important to them, because at some point, you as a program designer or implementer will have to make a decision between a trade-off between what to offer people. And if you don't know what's most important to them, you won't be able to make the correct trade-off. And next slide, please. So what can we do during this time of COVID where budgets are low, you can't have a lot of face-to-face interaction? There are not too many good answers, unfortunately, but here are a couple of things to consider. One is offering more energy education, through the utility. And I know my local utility in Portland does some of that to people and show them how they can save energy and still meet their needs. Another thing I'd like utilities to think about is remote programs where low-income customers can work with utilities either online or through some other means to basically get the same buy-downs they would get through direct install programs, but minimize their interaction with people. So we have the technology to be able to work with existing local organizations like Peter's to come up with some streamlined process to minimize interaction, but still get the verification and other evidence you need that a good job was done in the form of photos uploaded to online portals or something. And that's it for now. Hope some of this helps. Thank you.
Mohit, thank you very, very much. We've got a question for either you, Mohit or Peter, both of you, that needs some responding to. Both of you have spoken to equity. And are you thinking or talking about an equity program that's administered by the state, by government, by general government, or by utilities? Which Mohit, why don't you start answering that one?
So I personally don't care as much. I think different regions will have different ways of doing this based on their history. So you want to use what you've been doing, and in many places it is the utility, but co-fund it through different sources. So you have enough money to make a real difference, and that's what matters most.
Okay.
And
Peter,
related.
Sorry, Kath, go for it.
A related question in the chat is, what about landlord programs?
Peter, you want to answer that one?
You're on mute.
Right, there we go. Yeah, I'll just echo Mohit as well with the co-funding. I think that's one of the ways that CEP has historically been able to do more in homes. And, if you think of all of the overhead and cost that goes into going to a client's home, and then you're only able to do a few small measures, it'd be way more efficient to be able to do more and more at each home. So in terms of streamlining and cost and getting the most benefit, that I think makes the most. I did see Mohit jump at landlord programs. We work with tenants a lot, but it's certainly a challenge.
Yeah, and I would say that you do need some complementary state policy where if you are retrofitting a home, there needs to be some tenant protection, because when you've retrofitted a home, you've sometimes made it into a better home, and a landlord would then think that they can get more rent for that. So, that's a really hard problem that you want to think through.
Any other questions from the floor, from you guys, our participants? You're not quite on the floor yet.
I have kind of a big question, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately. How do you help limit the gentrification that may be caused by pouring funding and improvements into these communities? Because that's the last thing we want to do, but that's often what happens.
True.
Yeah. One thing that I think is important is that we do measure where the funding is going, and I think that's where it could be helpful to have like a state or a federal entity saying that this percentage of all funding for efficiency will flow to low-income frontline communities. And so I think those kind of tools that could be passed on a policy government level are some that could help reduce those other forces of gentrification.
Yeah, and I think that if someone's getting state money to improve their homes, that's not a reason to cause displacement. As a landlord, there needs to be some complementary policy to discourage displacement on homes made nicer. And then, I thought through what a long-term goal should be, and I carefully chose the words that it's as likely that a home occupied by low-income resident is as efficient as a non, because you really want to improve all available housing stock so that there isn't this big gap where once you made a home nicer, wealthier people are more likely to live in it. Because if all homes are a minimum level of nice, there's less of that happening.
Good, excellent. We've got a couple of questions that we're going to put to the panelists and folks that are participants here and listeners are welcome to add in. Our first question is, what strategies can we employ to increase the accessibility of low-income and vulnerable populations to energy efficiency programs and services? Strategies to increase the accessibility.
I think partnerships are one thing that popped to my mind here. CEP is one of many organizations up and down the West Coast that has, knowledge of the communities that we work in. But those organizations are often a gateway to accessing a broader part of the population that is not going to respond well to a utility mailer or, like even energy efficiency funding, if we think of it traditionally, and the incentive schemes that have come in the past. I really think thinking about relationships and partnerships is one key way that we can make sure that more gets deployed, more efficiency gets deployed in the near future.
Yeah, I want to echo Peter's statement about trust. An anecdote comes to mind. One of my first energy efficiency on-the-ground jobs was looking at a lower income program in Los Angeles. And a lot of the residents there had taken off their smart thermostats because they were afraid that there were cameras in them.
Oh.
And so there was no trust implied.
Yeah.
Someone went and installed these gadgets that someone didn't understand what they were doing, and then they didn't use it.
Yeah.
So we can't let that happen. And Peter's suggestion is just right there. One thing I'd like to add is we need eligibility for programs to be more flexible and better designed. Because what I notice a lot is this thing called the edge effect, where when you cut out eligibility at a certain income, anybody earning $1 more than that isn't, can't qualify, even though they might need it as much or more.
Mm-hmm. California has got different strategies for eligibility based on income, don't they?
Right.
Yeah.
But most strategies have a cutoff point. So just thinking, in California, the income disparity is so big that relative to your neighbors, that a lot of the middle income folk, who do live with a lot of constraint, get left behind.
Mm-hmm. Any other from the floor? Kat? Mm-hmm.
I don't see any questions in the chat at the moment, so maybe you can go on to your next question, Shani.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to, there was just one comment about how to determine income eligibility. It was very, very important. And I just wanted to recognize that question and see if Peter or Mohit had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, Sherry also works at CEP and has a ton of experience with this. But what we've seen in other programs is that how people are income verified can be disqualifying in itself. So for example, let's say a local agency requires you to come to downtown in person and provide a bunch of documents so that you can prove eligibility. That is, by default, going to rule out people who maybe work during the day, who don't have great access to public transportation, or don't have, even great access to the documentation that shows that they are income qualified. So that's a really important thing. And, CEP's strategy for a really long time has been just to trust our clients. So we ask them and we have them sign off and say that their income is what they say it is. And you know, it's not like we're not being personal in their homes. Like we have people going into their homes every day. And so it doesn't necessarily like behoove them to like try and lie about their income. Like we see that they need assistance, and we want to help them. And just thinking about it holistically too, like all of that cost that goes into setting up a system to prove income is just adding admin and overhead. You've all of a sudden you've created a super expensive program to operate that is going to have a hell of a time getting people in the door. So that's kind of the context and texture behind Sherry's addition there. Yeah.
Okay. Mohit, anything to add to that?
No, all the points well made.
Okay, all right. This topic is so rich. Go for it, Kat.
In the chat, Ronald is asking about new low-income housing. There seem to be limits to how efficient they can be built because of cost.
You know, that may deal with our next question is, how can policy play a role, and what policies would you like to see adopted? Construction of low-income housing is a big deal and could very well be mitigated or managed relative to the policies that governments put forward. But Mohit, want to take that one?
I can start.
Yeah,
I can start, and I'll say that we need broader housing policy. You can't solve everything to utility programs, and you need broader housing policy to make sure that there's less displacement after homes are retrofitted, and you need some tenant protections. And unless you have a broader housing policy, you'll keep running against these issues that Peter talked through and some of the folks in the chat talked about: gentrification, eligibility, and such. So we're, I think, running against the limits of how much a utility system on its own can do here.
Peter, what's your thoughts, policies?
Yeah, I think on the high level, I've been encouraged by some of the policy positions that have come out recently. Evergreen Action is a great example where they're really centering climate, social, racial, economic justice at the core of their platform. And one of the mechanisms by which they're suggesting doing that is, making sure that there's an equity dashboard and benchmark, and so that we're measuring where dollars are going, and then making sure, like their proposal is to make sure that 40% of all programs, and they're talking across efficiency but also other sectors too, benefit low-income frontline communities of color. So I think like that's taking that kind of lens and setting the high-level goals of where we want could work really well with kind of what Mohit was saying too. Is we need to start from like only a portion of the funding will be able to support low-income communities. We need to kind of put aside the cost effectiveness lens there and look at what are the goals. So a great goal is making sure that housing is as efficient with the general building stock. And then, just try to make sure that that pool is large enough to actually hit our goals. And then with the other sources of funding, keep trying to drive down the cost of energy. So.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Any other policy thoughts or recommendations from you guys? This is a conundrum that we're all in the middle of with COVID, and trying to figure out how to manage our environments, our business environments, and our personal environments. And it's quite challenging. I don't know that anybody's come up with a cure yet, much less a vaccination. Okay, we've got one more question, and that's in increased access. What are the barriers for reaching that wildfires and COVID-19 pose for low-income and vulnerable communities? And can we design programs to overcome those barriers? Go for it, Peter. You're lit up there.
Sure, yeah. Obviously it's a challenge. Otherwise we'd have done it. But, you know, our office and city, state, whole West Coast was inundated with smoke not long ago, as you guys probably all remember. And we got a lot of calls from households just saying that smoke was inside their home. They were having a hard time breathing in the house. Should they turn on their HVAC system? Should they not? You know, there's a lot of questions, and probably some false information was circling around. So, you know, I think it's a good example of, and maybe this gets back to the policy question too, of what are the multiple benefits that we can value and account for with some of these programs. So making sure that cost effectiveness does get us more total savings because we're maybe taking into account the cost of carbon, you know, avoided healthcare costs. There have been great reports recently, and I know the House is working on something to just show the healthcare costs associated with pollution. And that some of our energy transition could be fully paid for with just avoided healthcare costs. So, you know, tying these things, I think, is going to take the combination of policy and implementation on the ground and in people's homes. But yeah, just like those, you know, that anecdotes of calling people and talking to homeowners during the pandemic and during wildfires, these are things that people feel in their homes. And we had at least one client say, like, that those small, even air sealing measures that were done around her home, you know, helped her stay sane during the wildfires. And so what might seem like small ball sometimes can have really big impacts. And how do we value that?
Mohit, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll touch on the other aspect of wildfire impacted people, like those people whose homes have burned down. You know, when you rebuild a new home, making it more energy efficient can sometimes be more expensive, but living in that energy efficient home is cheaper. So we need to think through policy financing mechanisms where you can, you know, get somebody a more efficient home built, and knowing that they have lower utility bills going forward, the burden and the way they pay back for that home, you know, building in the mortgage with the utility, the total expense of living there lower, knowing that, you know, and sort of leveraging that could be one way forward.
Neither of you guys have spoken about direct services. I mean, one, talking to your customers in person and having people go into their homes to make these changes or to do whatever, you know, whether it's a new HVAC system or some whatever that you might be doing in those homes, having that happen. How are you preparing your employees for this?
Yeah, I can speak to that because CEP has a lot of direct services. You know, it became pretty clear to us in March and April, and as indicated by the city shutdown orders, that CEP is an essential service. And so are, you know, a lot of low income efficiency programs, weatherization programs are an essential service. You know, in the time between then and now, water heaters have gone out, furnaces have gone out. So we've continued to provide services. You know, we paused like everyone to assess what was happening and what needed to happen. But I think what we really decided is that, you know, we need to put the policies in place that protect our employees. You know, there's some things that would disqualify a household if they, you know, like refused to wear a mask or weren't willing to work with us in these times. But again, a lot of our clients are vulnerable too. And so, you know, a lot of elderly clients that we work with. So we want to protect them as well. So as much as we can do outside work in addition to, you know, doing things like replacing water heaters in garages and basements where we don't have to have a ton of interaction, that's been really important. And one of the best parts actually about the shutdown early on was our staff, you know, during that like full no activity happening in clients' homes, took about 2 weeks and called over 100 of clients that we'd served in past years and just talked to them. And some of my coworkers will say that they got on the phone and were on the phone for over an hour with clients who just wanted to talk. You know, it's like that social component is really important and helps what builds trust in the community, so that when we call and say, hey, we've got a new water heater program, they're pretty excited to hear what we have to say. So,
what did you have to do with your employees to get them prepared to go in? I can see working with the customer, but you've got a whole tribe of employees. How are you managing them?
Yeah, so we made sure, I mean, flexibility has probably been like the common theme across everyone. So we have employees who are more vulnerable than others. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone felt comfortable at work. And so, you know, if anyone didn't feel comfortable going into homes, we honored that as well and tried to find other tasks for them. Ultimately, what it looked like is that our staff was comfortable still going into homes. And we have, you know, protocol for masks that they wear, sanitizing before and after entering the home. Yeah, you know, we're constantly measuring those types of things as well. Yeah, I saw someone just posted some of the things that have come up on recent BPA calls and other weatherization organizations are doing. But yeah, you know, we're trying to look after our employees and make sure that they feel comfortable. And you know, I think I can speak for them in saying that they have thus far.
Mohit, do you have some thoughts on the either employee or customer access issues and how to improve it?
Only one thought, given that my work doesn't involve that, is that you can design the most well-meaning, most exact policy, but unless you have the right people on the ground working through that, none of that works.
Can you define frontline communities? And what both of you have spoken about frontline communities being the targets for the work that we're talking about for either COVID or for fire mitigation practices. Can you define what a frontline community is? Mohit, go for that one. That's one I think that came up in your presentation.
Yeah, I actually didn't use that word. I wonder if it's a Peter question, you know, and yeah.
I think largely the term is meant to capture people that will be impacted first and oftentimes worst by the impacts of climate change or other afflictions that face our society. So, you know, like the pandemic is another example. And obviously the forest fires have links to climate change too. So it's a perfect example of the poorly weatherized, poorly air sealed homes being much more vulnerable than someone who has a, you know, new build with low air exchanges per hour that can have all of their air being filtered through a central filter. So,
Kat, do you want? I think Nancy had a question that we could respond to.
Sure. Nancy asked, how can we increase the support of retailers, contractors, and vendors who can help provide access to energy efficient products?
So Nancy, could you clarify, do you want to encourage them more, or do you to offer these products? Is that
thanks. I want to make sure that, you know, when community members reach out to find products or get advice on a product or work with a program deliverer, whether it's CEP or others, the products that are being promoted from the retailer side and from the contractor side are in fact the ones we want installed, and that they are not, you know, pushing other products that may not be as efficient, but the customer may not know, or even the community program deliverer may not know which is the best product. So there has to be more coordination and collaboration. So I'm wondering how we can facilitate that.
So I'll give a thought on that and then see if Peter has something to add. I think that there's no substitute for education, and that's where something like an Energy Star program has done so well, because once you have a visible label of trust, then customers usually know what to do. And continuing to basically make sure that products incentivized by utilities do fall in that category, Nancy, that you said, of good products, and continue to improve our minimum appliance standards so that the floor is high.
Yeah, I'll add one kind of anecdote about piggybacking on the education piece, which is, you know, since Portland's adopted the home energy score ordinance and all of these scores are in place, there's been, I would say, a way clearer dissemination of what actually is efficient and not efficient in clients' homes. So I've had tons of conversations, myself and other members on our team, through calls of, you know, conversations with realtors who will say, oh, this house should be super efficient, they just got all new windows. And, you know, it's a 1900s home and they haven't touched the shell of the house other than the windows. So there's no insulation in the walls or the attic. And, you know, they've got an 80% gas furnace in the basement. And so, you know, like the perception of efficiency broadly outside of our kind of energy circle is often not there. And that is the importance of energy disclosure and just things that bring awareness to energy. So it's not directly answering like the retailer vendor question, but it is a plug for the information.
Right, but Peter, what's really important in what you said is the importance of encouraging easy to see and understand labels, you know, that provide accurate information.
Yeah.
Peter, your slides noted that you said 30% of your population is Hispanic, and I'm going to assume they're Spanish speaking. Many of the kids that are in hospitals and that are dying from COVID are Hispanic. How are you managing that? I mean, and kids used to be our access to their parents because they spoke English, and they would be the folks that kind of help you get in the door. How are you managing the translation issues?
Well, we always offer translation services if our clients need them. So we can, you know, we have call-in services if we need interpreters on the phone with clients. And before COVID, it was also available to bring interpreters to houses if we needed to. And then, you know, we do produce content for our programs in multiple languages through outreach as well. So, yeah, you know, we do have a good pipeline of homes that we need to serve in traditionally Hispanic, Latino neighborhoods as well.
How about the deaf?
Yeah.
Do you manage the deaf? I mean, there are deaf people in homes that.
Oh, the deaf.
The deaf, yeah. You didn't understand what I was asking.
Well, I thought you meant the death, and I was like, oh, the death is terrible. Obviously, with all COVID and everything. Yeah, you know, honestly, I don't have a specific client or household in mind. And Sherry's been with CEP for over 15 years, so I'm sure she's experienced it in her time here. But yeah, I'm not sure of a specific example.
Okay. Mohit, do you have any examples out of California or even the Oregon environment that you've seen of handling disadvantaged populations or handicapped?
Broad policy examples usually include offering services in more than one language, you know. And you know, when I first visited Seattle years ago, I was really impressed that they had subway announcements in Chinese, English, and Spanish. And I just remember thinking how great that was. Yeah. Nothing smarter than that to say right now.
Okay. We've got a couple more minutes. Kat, are there any questions that we can address or answer from the floor? Mhm.
So this was touched on a little, but what type of outreach is working well in these COVID times? So is there anything to add there? It's kind of been discussed, but Peter or Mohit, do you want to add anything?
Just keep it up. I mean, it's really important to continue communicating with neighborhoods and making sure that the messages of there are organizations out there that are willing to help. Efficiency is important as ever right now to reduce, carbon impacts and other environmental afflictions. So yeah, just in terms of doing outreach, we're still doing a lot. And I think it's important to think about multiple modalities. We can't just be online. We have to be in communities and distanced as much as we can, but actually making sure that we're going to people and not waiting for them to come to us.
Any more questions from the floor, so to speak?
Heather's hand is up. Heather, would you like to ask a question?
Sure. I just posted it in chat also, but I love the idea of separate portfolios for energy deficiency depending on their goal. And I'm partially being devil's advocate here, but California has some really progressive policies about climate and equity goals. What hope is there for us in the Pacific Northwest?
Can I add one sort of detail to that question before more Northwest answers given by Peter? Is that it's easier to craft policy goals and it's harder to implement them and realize them, and so even though we have those goals, doesn't mean that we're performing in an outstanding manner as well. We're trying our best. Secondly, having separate portfolios and equity goals doesn't mean that it means that there's increased accountability for utilities. Because so far, when you've buried equity goals in a cost effectiveness metric and between the layers of different energy efficiency programs, they can sometimes go unnoticed. But when you're explicit about what your objectives are and that you need to maximize those with your given budget, you will do a better job. So some regulators sometimes think that this sort of recommendation would decrease accountability on spending, but no, it's the opposite.
Okay.
One more question in the chat, and then I think we'll wrap up. Do you have any suggestions for funding limited public schools looking to increase ventilation and air filtering with energy efficiency in mind?
That's a prime example of a co-funding requirement, right? You're doing it for health reasons. Research has shown that kids that sit in comfortable spaces do better in test scores and learn more than kids that don't, So that's like a prime example of where energy efficiency can be the deliverer, but we need help to make that happen. Broader policy help sometimes.
Okay, Kat. Thanking our speakers very much. Mohit, Peter, you guys have been a wealth of information and you managed some tough questions. Folks have put on the chat some links to research that can support this whole topic of access during COVID and in the face of Northwest fires. So do look at the chat level to get some of those links available to you folks that have been dutifully listening to our presentations and answering questions.
And I will save the chat, and we're going to post a recording of this webinar on our website. So below that on the website, I can include some of those links.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So we'll get that done later this week.
Okay.
So thank you so much to Shani and our speakers for this webinar. We really appreciate it.
Okay, great.